It was a bright morning in suburban Atlanta. The streets were quiet and the lawns freshly mowed. On Willow Creek Drive lived a 38-year-old man named Thomas Blake, a quiet, hard-working mechanic who owned a small garage near the highway. People in the neighborhood often said, "You can trust Tom," because he minded his business, paid his bills, and never raised his voice. He was married to Karina, a beautiful 34-year-old woman who worked at a local dental clinic. They had been married for 6 years. Everyone thought they were the perfect couple, but things were not perfect inside their home. Thomas had started noticing changes in Karina. She stayed out late, was always on her phone, and suddenly began refusing intimacy. He kept quiet for a long time, until one night he found something disturbing. Her phone, left carelessly on the bed, had a series of texts from two different men. The messages were explicit. His hands trembled as he scrolled, each word cutting deeper. The next morning he went to the clinic for a full STD test. He didn't know what he feared more, the truth about her or the consequences of it. A few days later the results came in. Positive, chlamydia and herpes. The nurse told him gently, but her voice felt like thunder in his ears. He hadn't slept with anyone else. Not in years. It could only mean one thing. Rage began building slowly, like a fire under dry leaves. Instead of confronting her, Thomas waited. He kept his routine normal, went to work, ate dinner with her, smiled when she smiled. But inside he was dying, until one Friday evening. He left work early and drove home quietly. His garage door opener wasn't working, so he parked by the curb and walked around back. That was when he heard it. Laughter, moaning, voices, more than one, two men, and Karina, upstairs. Thomas walked in slowly, his house, his wife, his betrayal. He crept up the stairs and pushed the bedroom door open. What he saw made his heart collapse. There she was, tangled between two men he had never seen before. They didn't even notice him, too busy, until he pulled out his phone. No yelling, no threats. He just pressed record. The three of them froze when they noticed him, but he didn't say a word. He walked out. 2 hours later, the video wasn't online, but something else was. Thomas posted his STD results with a caption, "This is what my wife gave me. I hope her lovers are ready too." The post exploded. It got shared on Facebook, Instagram, even local forums. The comments were brutal, but the worst was yet to come. By 10 p.m., police received 3 911 calls from the same block. One from a neighbor screaming, "I heard gunshots." One from a man gasping for air saying, they're dead." And one silent call, with only heavy breathing and crying in the background. When officers arrived at the Blake residence, they found Thomas sitting in the living room, covered in blood, not moving, just staring. Upstairs, the three bodies were discovered. Karina. One man shot in the neck, the other with a shattered skull. The room was a mess. Sheets soaked in red, broken furniture, empty vodka bottles. The entire town froze. Murder-suicides weren't new in America, but this wasn't one of those cases. Thomas was alive, calm, silent, and that's when the call was made to Detective Ronald Pierce, a 62-year-old seasoned investigator with a cold mind and a long record of solving twisted crimes. As he lit a cigarette outside the house that night, he muttered to the young officer beside him, "This isn't about jealousy, it's about shame, and shame makes people dangerous. Let's find out what really happened here." Detective Ronald Pierce had seen a lot in his 35 years on the force. Drug busts, gang violence, family murders. But there was something about the Blake house that night, the silence, the tension in the air, that made his gut feel heavy. He stepped into the house at 11:03 p.m. The living room was still. Thomas Blake sat on the couch like a statue. His shirt was soaked in blood. His hands rested calmly on his lap. There was no weapon in sight. "Mr. Blake," Pierce said slowly, kneeling in front of him. "Can you hear me?" Thomas looked up. His eyes were empty, almost as if his soul had walked out hours ago. "She lied," he whispered. "She lied. With them." That was all he said before falling silent again. Officers took him into custody without resistance. Pierce stood up, sighed, and made his way upstairs. The bedroom told a violent story. Karina's body was slumped against the dresser, a gunshot wound to the chest. Her eyes were wide open, frozen in horror. Blood had spilled across the floor, creeping toward a knocked-over lamp. One of the men, later identified as Marcus Dean, a 30-year-old fitness trainer, had been shot in the neck. He died almost instantly, the coroner would later confirm. The second man was worse. He had been bludgeoned. A broken glass whiskey bottle lay nearby, covered in brain matter. His name was Calvin Rhodes, 27 years old, an amateur rapper with a criminal record. The bedsheets were shredded. Clothes were everywhere. A used condom wrapper stuck to the wall. A shattered phone in the corner of the room flashed with low battery warnings. Detective Pierce stepped over the blood and looked around carefully. Then he saw something that stood out. A camera. Small, discreet, hidden inside a smoke detector casing, still blinking red. He called over an officer. "Get this to tech. I want the last 24 hours off it." As crime scene investigators got to work, Pierce returned downstairs. An officer handed him Thomas Blake's phone. The same post was still up. Hundreds of comments, some laughing, some expressing anger, others sharing their own cheating horror stories. But one comment caught Pierce's eye. It read, "If I found my wife with 2 men and STDs in my system, they'd all be dead too." Respect Pierce clenched his jaw. "People think this is a joke," he muttered. "This is real blood on real hands." The initial theory was simple. Thomas caught his wife cheating. He snapped, killed all 3 in a fit of rage. But Pierce didn't buy it. "Too clean," he said to his partner, Detective Lila Monroe. "He didn't run. He didn't shoot himself. He just sat there, like he was waiting for us." Lila, who was still new to homicide, looked puzzled. "You think someone else could be involved?" "Not sure yet, but something's off. The scene tells a story, but not the full one. And I want to know who posted that STD test and why Thomas didn't delete the evidence afterward." They went to the tech lab. The phone had no passcode. Inside were photos of the STD results, call logs showing recent calls to Karina, and one video. It was the footage from the bedroom. Thomas had recorded everything. But what shocked them most was the timestamp. The video was recorded 3 hours before the murders, meaning he caught them, left the house, and came back later. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was planned, and that made things very dangerous. Pierce leaned back in his chair and whispered, "We're not just dealing with a husband who lost control. We're dealing with a man who calculated pain. That makes him either a monster or a man with a deeper secret." Detective Pierce barely slept that night. Something in the case gnawed at him. Thomas Blake had no criminal record, no history of violence, not even a parking ticket. And yet here he was, calm, covered in blood, with 3 bodies upstairs. By morning, Pierce and Detective Monroe met at the precinct to go over the evidence again. "We know Thomas recorded them," Monroe said, sipping her black coffee. "He left the house, posted his STD results, and then came back and killed them. It lines up." "No," Pierce shook his head. "It doesn't. You don't film your wife in bed with 2 men, walk away, and calmly prepare a murder. There's something we're not seeing." Just then, Monroe's phone buzzed. It was the forensics lab. She answered quickly. "Detective Monroe." "Yes. Okay, send it over." She turned to Pierce. They pulled the footage from the hidden bedroom camera. They opened the file on a secure laptop. The camera caught everything from a high corner of the room. The night of the murder, Karina had let both men in. She kissed them. They drank. They joked about Thomas, calling him boring and soft. At one point, Karina even laughed. "He's not man enough to handle me. I had to outsource." The words were like knives. Then something unexpected happened. A knock at the door. Karina looked nervous. She walked downstairs and came back with a woman. Dark-skinned, slim, maybe in her late 20s. She was not part of the earlier recording Thomas made. "She's not in the crime scene photos," Monroe whispered. The woman stayed only 10 minutes. She didn't join the others. She walked around the room, whispered something to Karina, then left. "That's the thread," Pierce said. "She's the one we need to find." Later that afternoon, they visited Karina's workplace, Peach Dental Clinic. The receptionist, shaken by the news, mentioned that Karina had recently reconnected with an old friend, a woman named Naomi Keller. She used to come by the clinic on Karina's lunch break, the receptionist said. Always dressed sharp, expensive handbags. I think she's in real estate. Monroe did a quick background check. Naomi Keller, 28, owned a small luxury rental business in downtown Atlanta. No criminal record, but her name appeared once in a civil lawsuit involving Thomas Blake. Pierce narrowed his eyes. That's strange. When? 2 years ago, Monroe replied. A financial dispute. She claimed Thomas refused to refund a down payment for a custom vehicle. The case was dismissed. Call her in, Pierce said. Now. At the station, Naomi looked nervous but confident. I had nothing to do with this, she said as she sat across the table. Why were you in the Blake house the night of the murders? Pierce asked directly. Naomi blinked. I was just dropping off something Karina asked for. A necklace. Funny, Monroe said, flipping open a file. We didn't find any necklace on the scene. Naomi hesitated. Maybe she already put it away. Pierce leaned forward. You weren't just there to drop something off. You were involved with Karina. We saw the footage. You knew what was going on. Naomi's face twitched. Then she cracked. Fine. Yes, I was involved, but not in the way you think. Karina and I were friends, close friends, and yes, we had a thing years ago. She said she was tired of Thomas. She wanted out. So she invited two men over to make it clear? Monroe asked. She said it was about revenge, Naomi muttered. She said Thomas embarrassed her in public once, told her she was nothing without him. She wanted to humiliate him. Pierce scribbled in his notebook. And what did you say when you saw what was happening that night? Naomi's eyes watered. I told her it was too far. I told her this was dangerous. But she laughed, said Thomas wouldn't do anything, called him a coward. Pierce stood. You need to stay available. Don't leave town. This isn't over. As Naomi was escorted out, Monroe looked at Pierce. Do you believe her? Only one part, Pierce said. The part where she said Karina underestimated Thomas. That much is clear. But deep in his gut, Pierce knew this story wasn't just about cheating. Something else had pushed Thomas over the edge, and it was hiding in his past. The next morning, Detective Pierce returned to Willow Creek Drive with a quiet determination. The house was still sealed off with yellow tape. Blood had dried on the staircase. The air felt heavier now, not just with death, but with questions. Pierce didn't believe this case was about sex or betrayal anymore. It was about control, shame, and something deeper, something buried. Back at the precinct, Detective Monroe greeted him with a file in hand. You're going to want to see this, she said. She handed over a thick folder marked Thomas Blake, sealed court records. How'd you get this? Pierce asked. Had a friend in records who owed me a favor. Pierce flipped it open. His brow furrowed immediately. 8 years ago, long before Karina, Thomas had been engaged to another woman, Renee Darden. She was a nurse. They lived together in a small apartment before the engagement ended abruptly. According to court documents, Renee had filed a restraining order against Thomas after accusing him of emotional manipulation, spying, and suspected physical abuse. No charges were filed. There was no proof. The court dismissed the case, and Renee moved out of state. That doesn't sound like the Thomas we've seen, Monroe said cautiously. Pierce sighed. People wear masks. Some don't come off until the pressure builds. He kept digging. There was more. A police report from 5 years ago. A garage employee accused Thomas of installing a GPS tracker on his girlfriend's car without her knowledge. Again, no charges were filed, but it added to a pattern. Pierce leaned back in his chair. This guy, he didn't just snap. He's been teetering for years. Monroe looked up from her screen. What if he didn't kill them because they cheated? What if he killed them because they exposed who he really was? Just then, forensics emailed the lab results from the scene. Gun used, .38 revolver, registered to Thomas Blake. Fingerprints on the whiskey bottle, only Thomas. No signs of forced entry. All victims were killed within minutes of each other. No defensive wounds on Karina. She didn't fight back. But one detail stood out. The camera Thomas used to record the bedroom scene was connected to a cloud storage server. Monroe pulled the footage archive. Dozens of files, all dated weeks, even months back. They watched one. It showed Karina, alone, talking on the phone. She didn't know she was being filmed. Thomas had set up surveillance inside his own home. Another file showed her sleeping. Another, her undressing in the bathroom. This man was watching her for months, Monroe whispered. And planning his response, Pierce added darkly. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a response to humiliation. A man who felt powerless, now making sure they felt powerless too. Pierce picked up the interrogation request. Let's talk to Thomas again. In the holding room, Thomas sat quietly. Same calm expression, same silence. Pierce walked in and placed the court file and cloud footage folder on the table. We know about Renee, he said. We know about the spying, the tracking, the recordings. You want to talk about that? Thomas looked at the file, then at Pierce. He didn't blink. I gave everything to Karina, he said finally. Everything. And she laughed at me. They all laughed. You planned it, didn't you? Pierce asked. You wanted them to suffer. But why kill all of them? Why not just walk away? Thomas's face tightened. Because they needed to know what it feels like. To be stripped. To be humiliated. I let it happen in front of my eyes. And then I took back control. Pierce leaned forward. Did Naomi help you? Was she part of it? Thomas laughed, soft and cold. Naomi? She was just another tool. She thought Karina loved her, but Karina loved no one. He looked Pierce dead in the eye. This wasn't murder, detective. It was justice. And I've been planning it since the day I found that first text message. Pierce stood, heart heavy. This wasn't a man broken by betrayal. This was a man who calculated his revenge down to the second. And now he sat in silence, knowing the pain he caused. But Pierce wasn't done yet. He still didn't know where Thomas got the gun, or how Naomi fit into the final hours. Detective Ronald Pierce sat in his office with the lights dimmed. Outside, the sun was setting, casting orange shadows across the blinds. The case had become more than just a triple homicide. It had become a window into a man's twisted plan for vengeance. But something still didn't sit right. Yes, Thomas Blake had motive. Yes, he had the means. Yes, he confessed. But there were holes. Pierce flipped through the forensics report again. The revolver used in the murders was legally registered to Thomas. But here's the problem. It had gone missing 3 months ago. Thomas had reported it stolen, filed a formal report with the local sheriff's office. According to records, he claimed the weapon was taken from his garage locker by a former employee named Leo Kerrigan. Pierce circled the name. Who's Leo? Monroe asked, leaning over his shoulder. Ex-employee. Fired after 2 months. No follow-up investigation. The report was buried. Pierce called the garage where Thomas worked. A manager named Chuck answered. Yeah, Leo worked with us for a bit, Chuck said. Smart kid. But Thomas said he caught him stealing, so he let him go. Pierce asked for Leo's address and drove out that evening. Leo Kerrigan lived in a shabby apartment downtown. The building smelled of smoke and old carpet. Pierce knocked 3 times. A teenage boy opened the door, skinny, nervous. Leo Kerrigan? Pierce asked. Yeah, that's me. I'm Detective Pierce. We need to talk about Thomas Blake. Leo stepped aside. His room was cluttered with electronics, wires, and 2 broken scooters. I didn't steal his gun, Leo said before Pierce could even sit down. I swear. You're saying he lied about that? Leo nodded quickly. Yes, sir. He asked me to hold it for him, said he was planning to sell it to someone, but didn't want it in his house. I was stupid, so I said yes. Kept it in my locker at work. And then what happened? One day he told me he needed it back. Came by my apartment at night. Picked it up. That was 2 weeks before all this. Pierce leaned forward. Why would he lie and say you stole it? Leo looked down. I think he wanted an excuse to cover his tracks, in case someone asked where the gun had been. That was it. Premeditation. Back at the precinct, Pierce pulled Monroe aside. Thomas staged the theft to build a paper trail, so if the weapon was ever traced, it would look like it had been out of his hands for months. Monroe frowned. So he didn't just plan the murders? He planted lies in advance to protect himself. Pierce nodded grimly. This man didn't snap. He studied this. They dug further. Thomas's internet search history, recovered from his home computer, showed queries like, how long does chlamydia last? Untreated? How to destroy a person without touching them? STD revenge stories. Georgia self-defense loopholes. That last one caught Pierce's attention. He turned to Monroe. You remember what Thomas said? This wasn't murder. It was justice. Maybe he was hoping to plead self-defense. Monroe raised an eyebrow. Even with 3 dead? Maybe he expected only one to die. Maybe the others weren't part of the plan. Then a call came from the tech team. Detective Pierce, you're going to want to see this. We pulled deleted footage from the cloud camera. There's something you didn't catch before. Pierce rushed to the lab. On the screen, the footage showed a conversation between Karina and one of the men, Marcus Dean, a full day before the murder. In the video, Karina said, "He's been watching me. I can feel it. I think he knows. I don't care anymore. I hope he sees everything." Marcus replied, "Then let's give him something to watch. He deserves it." Then she looked directly into the camera, knowingly, and whispered, "Let's ruin him." Pierce froze. Karina knew she was being watched. The trap Thomas thought he set was already a trap waiting for him. Now Pierce had to figure out, was Thomas the hunter, or was he just another victim in a deadly game of pride and shame? Detective Ronald Pierce stared at the paused video footage in the evidence lab. Karina's face frozen on the screen, her eyes locked directly with the hidden camera, lips curled in a smirk. It was no longer just a betrayal. It was provocation. She wanted Thomas to see her. She invited the shame, played with it, turned it into a weapon. And Thomas, thinking he was the one watching, had already been caught in a trap he never saw coming. Pierce turned to Monroe, who was just as stunned. "This wasn't just cheating," Pierce said. "It was psychological warfare." Monroe nodded. "So now the question is, did Karina push him, knowing it might break him? Or was she pushing him so he would break?" The cloud camera footage kept giving up secrets. Another video, recorded 3 days before the murders, showed Naomi Keller at the house again. This time, she and Karina were talking quietly in the kitchen. Their voices were faint but clear enough. "Naomi, you really think he'll do something?" Karina, "He's weak. All talk, no bite. I want him to feel it, Naomi. I want him to know what it feels like to be powerless." Naomi, "This is dangerous. You've pushed too far." Karina, "Let him break. I'm ready." Pierce sat back, stunned. Karina wanted Thomas to collapse. She orchestrated every move, the affairs, the recordings. Even Naomi was used, roped in like a pawn. But something else gnawed at Pierce. Why would she go so far? The answer came from an unlikely source. The team had pulled emails and private messages from Karina's cloud backup. One thread between her and a woman named Linda McGraw, a family therapist, revealed something shocking. Karina had been seeing a therapist for over a year. In one message she wrote, "He never hits me, but he watches me constantly, tracks my phone, questions my every move. I want out, but I want him to hurt the way I've hurt for years." That's when it clicked. Thomas wasn't just betrayed, he had been exposed. The spying, the control, the quiet mental abuse. Karina had taken it and taken it until she decided to return the favor. But her revenge wasn't about leaving, it was about ruining him. Detective Pierce stood outside Thomas's holding cell later that evening. He watched the man through the glass, still calm, still silent. He walked in with a folder and sat down across from him. "I watched the footage, Thomas. All of it." Thomas didn't flinch. "She knew about the camera," Pierce continued. "She played you, set the trap." Thomas smiled faintly, the first expression he'd shown in days. "I know." "You knew she was baiting you, and you still did it?" Pierce asked. Thomas leaned forward. "Let me ask you something, detective. If someone ties you up, lights your house on fire, and sits back laughing, are you guilty for running through the flames to save yourself?" Pierce stayed silent. Thomas went on. "I didn't kill them because they hurt me. I killed them because they enjoyed it." Pierce opened the folder. "You had another option." You could have left. I didn't want to leave, Thomas said. I wanted her to know that I saw everything, that no matter how deep she dug into me, I could dig deeper. I didn't lose control. I took it back. Monroe entered the room and whispered into Pierce's ear. We pulled Naomi's full call history. She made 2 calls an hour before the murders. One to Karina, one to a burner phone. That traces back to Thomas. Pierce turned to Thomas slowly. Naomi warned you, didn't she? Thomas nodded once. She told me they were laughing about the STD post, drinking, getting ready to do it again. You drove home with the gun. I wasn't going to use it at first, Thomas said. But when I saw them, when I saw her face, he didn't finish. Pierce closed the folder and stood. 3 people are dead, Thomas. You're not walking out of this. I'm not trying to, Thomas said calmly. Just tell the world the truth. Tell them I didn't go crazy. I just woke up. Outside the room, Monroe shook her head. He wants to be a martyr, like his crime was some noble stand. Pierce looked back at the glass. Number. He doesn't want to be seen as a monster, but monsters don't always growl. Some sit in silence and smile while the house burns. Still, something remained. If Naomi warned him, was she just a witness or a silent accomplice? Detective Ronald Pierce knew the end was near. The facts were all on the table, the evidence neatly stacked. But something still felt unfinished, like a final piece hadn't clicked into place, and it had to do with Naomi Keller. Thomas had admitted to the killings. The camera footage proved months of surveillance. Karina had intentionally provoked him, but Naomi's role was still unclear. Why would she call Thomas right before the murders? Why would she go to the house twice in the days leading up to the crime? Pierce called her in for a second interrogation. Naomi entered the room looking nervous. Her hands trembled as she held her purse tight to her chest. Pierce didn't waste time. We know you warned Thomas. She nodded slowly. I didn't know he was going to kill them. You went to the house earlier that week. You saw the setup. You saw what Karina was planning. You said it made you uncomfortable. So why didn't you stop her? Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I was scared. Karina, she was different lately. Cold, vicious. I begged her to stop. Why call Thomas? Pierce asked. I wanted to give him a chance to walk away, Naomi replied. I told him to leave, not to go back there. Pierce stared at her. What exactly did you say? Naomi hesitated. I said, she's laughing at you again. Please don't do anything stupid. Just let her go. But she hadn't told anyone that she also said, they're upstairs right now, drinking, celebrating what they did to you. She had given him just enough information to light the fuse. Pierce stood slowly. You weren't just a bystander. You were the match that lit the gasoline. Naomi's voice cracked. I didn't mean to. But you did, he cut in. You knew who he was. You knew what he was capable of. You knew what Karina was doing. And you fed him that last piece of shame. Naomi broke down. I just wanted it to stop. Thomas Blake, a local mechanic, discovered he had contracted STDs. Upon investigating, he confirmed that his wife, Karina Blake, had been engaged in multiple sexual relationships, including a documented encounter with Marcus Dean and Calvin Rhodes. Instead of confronting her immediately, Thomas installed surveillance equipment and monitored her for several weeks. Karina discovered the surveillance and intentionally provoked Thomas, recording a sexually explicit encounter in full view of the camera. These events were planned as an emotional attack against Thomas, part of a long pattern of psychological retaliation after years of alleged controlling behavior by Thomas. Naomi Keller, a known associate of Karina and former romantic partner, was involved in the days leading to the murder. While not physically present at the time of the crime, she made phone calls that directly contributed to Thomas's final emotional breakdown. Murder weapon, .38 caliber revolver, registered to Thomas Blake, previously reported stolen. Evidence confirms it remained in Thomas's possession. Key evidence, cloud-based surveillance footage, Thomas Blake's internet history and deleted emails, Naomi Keller's call logs and video visits, previous court records and restraining orders involving Thomas Blake. Conclusion, this case represents a rare instance where psychological warfare between partners escalated into a premeditated triple homicide. While Thomas Blake was the sole perpetrator of the murders, emotional provocation and manipulation by both Karina Blake and Naomi Keller contributed significantly to the events. This wasn't a case about love or lust. This was a war, cold, calculated, and fought with shame. In the end, no one won. As Pierce walked out of the precinct that night, the streetlights flickered above. He lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. Sometimes justice was clear. Sometimes it came soaked in blood and silence. But in the shadows of Willow Creek, the truth had finally come out.